welcome to the Petey Performance Podcast. How are you all doing? I hope you're all doing well. I am doing a solo episode today. It's been a little while since I've recorded a solo episode, so hopefully I get straight back into the swing of things. But what I'm coming on to talk about today is something that has been coming up a lot for me in the last 4 weeks as we hit the mid-season stage in relation to Gaelic games, GAA, football and hurling, and camogie as well, I suppose. And it is return to play versus return to performance. Obviously, it's that stage of the season that we've been now participating or playing for a number of months in a row. And with a number of months of training and match play come potential for a number of injuries, a number of chronic injuries, a number of acute injuries for sure. And we can never put injury down to one sole factor. It's multifactorial. A lot of it could be put down to the fact that at this stage of the season, there is a lot of residual fatigue has built up, as well as that we're playing matches that are perceived to be more meaningful, given that positions in the league table are starting to set in stone, or we're playing for potential to go and win trophies, win championships, win leagues. Everybody's at the league stage at the moment. But nonetheless, players are probably getting ideas for what the starting team is going to be. They might be feeling that they're not going to be part of it. They might be feeling they have to do a little bit more to get into it. They might be feeling that they need to shoulder a lot of responsibility and carry the team. They might be feeling under pressure to go and win. And those are all psychological pressures that add to the physical pressure. And then as well as that, we're in the summer. So people are going to start enjoying themselves a little bit more, going out for a few drinks, which there is absolutely nothing wrong with. However, we do need to keep all of our recovery processes in order, including our sleep and our nutrition and our hydration. We're having some fantastic weather here in Ireland at the moment, but with that comes a risk that we're not going to be optimally hydrated going into our training sessions, going into our matches. And with all of these multitude of factors comes a higher risk of injury. As well as that, not to mention, if your strength and conditioning or your training program isn't in line, you're not getting exposure to max speed, at least on a weekly basis. A lot of players that are carrying niggles might be stepping away from training and completely deloading because there is this attitude that rest is good and rest solves the injuries, whereas that is not necessarily the case, as you know. And as well as that, a lot of what I'm seeing people post-acute injuries complete some level of rehab. And then a lot of the time, people that are coming to me personally in an online setting or in an in-person setting privately, they're under a lot of pressure to play games in the league, and they're being put under time pressure to get themselves sorted. Now, in fairness to them, a lot of them have been strong enough and bold enough to say, no, I'm just going to focus on getting myself right come championship or for the championship or for another few rounds down the line, especially when it is a grade 2 injury, which will obviously be a little bit more severe than a grade 1. And obviously for all of us, well, the vast majority of us, championship is the ultimate goal. So we've got to keep that in mind. And I understand from the technical, tactical coach's perspective that they need the team playing together more consistently, and they need to get a look at players, and they need players playing football or playing hurling or playing camogie. And they need to improve the technical and the tactical ability of both the team and the player. However, I don't think we get very far by rushing players back into match play just because we want them to get more minutes or we want them to get more gameplay in the short term. I know it feeds towards the long term, but I think the risk is far outweighs the reward, where they may suffer another injury and then they're going to miss even more training sessions, more games, and potentially they will just be coming back for the championship, or they might miss it altogether. So I think that's why we have a structured rehab program, a structured return to play program, and what I term a return to performance program. Because a lot of what I see and what frustrates me, and what I spoke about on the podcast with David Gray recently, a couple of months ago, was Dave's big bugbear is there's a lot of lazy practitioner work going on, in that, like, oh, you have a hamstring problem, here's some Nordics, do them for 2 weeks, you should be fine. Oh, you have a calf issue, here's some calf raises, do them for 2 weeks, you should be fine. Oh, you have a quad issue, here's some leg extensions, do them for a couple of weeks, you should be fine. And like, we know that performance doesn't work like that. That's the whole principle of training. We train, and we train across the spectrum in terms of developing specific qualities and progressive overload in order to get back to the pitch and improve performance on the pitch. So just because you're symptom free doesn't mean that you've actually improved performance. And I do find it a little bit lazy at times. And a lot of the people that come to me haven't been treated the best. And I know that it's a case that it's not that the practitioner, the person that's putting them through that, doesn't believe that what they're doing is inherently wrong. And it's not inherently wrong. It's just potentially not the best thing. I know that everybody thinks that they're doing the best thing, but we understand about training, and we understand about speed, we understand about change of direction, that it's a spectrum. Same with conditioning. So you can't expect someone to just do a few calf raises and then go straight back into full training and matches and expect them to be fine. Because if you get them back to the physical state that they were in when they got injured, it's probably not going to be enough to reduce the risk of injury going forward, because that was the physical state they were in when they're injured. So it's my perspective that you need to return them to the field of play a better athlete than when they left it. And that's nothing groundbreaking, but it's not really practiced very often. Sometimes we fail to see the forest for the trees in terms of player welfare and the long-term consequences of getting players back too early, because ultimately we're working towards long-term goals. Obviously, you have a match day on a certain week, but if it's not championship and it's not that business end of the season or the NBA finals or whatever type of sport you're playing, or the actual ultimate goal, there is probably not much point in risking athletes and putting them back into match play and into training sessions too early. It probably actually negatively impacts the team a little bit, and impacts that athlete negatively as well. And there is an attitude still, and I know it's getting better, but there still is a pervading attitude in Gaelic games and in rugby and in soccer that you should be able to play through injuries. If you're not mentally tough. And that's the sacrifice you should be making. And if you really wanted it, you would be able to do so. But what that neglects is how far we've come in terms of the sports, that the outputs that are being output now, in terms of the max speed, in terms of the change of direction, in terms of the amount of kilometers players are covering in a game, far exceed what was being covered even 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So the demands of the game are now greater. So therefore, the players need to be more physically prepared to play the game, and they need to be trained to a higher standard in order to do so. So like Kevin Moran was on last night, and there was a famous video of him playing in the All-Ireland final with 6 stitches and a hamstring injury, and the fella was hobbling around the pitch. And the decision that was made, not that it was wrong, but the decision that was made was obviously a 50% or a 60% Moran was better than an 100% player off the bench. And that might have been just the times. It might have been the case just because he was a phenomenal player. But most of the time, an athlete at 50% is not going to be as good as an athlete that is at 100%. And that is why we see substitutes being used far more or far less conservatively nowadays, because as players tire, we need to bring impact off the bench. And that's why I myself like to use the analogies similar to rugby, that they're not your substitutes because that has a negative connotation. They are your impact players. They are your finishers. They are your game sealers. And they serve a really important role. And sure, it's fine to be a little bit frustrated if you're a substitute, but you still need to make the decision that I'm going to do what's best for the team here. I'm going to be selfless. And when I come on the field, I'm going to do my absolute best and I'm going to seal this win. I'm going to pull it back. I'm going to absolutely smoke the opposition. I'm going to put absolutely everything into it. And I'm going to help this team to win because I am part of this team and I want this team to win more than my ego wants to be fed. And I want to be a starter on this team. And only when that is the case is a team going to be successful. But to get back to my point, that purveying attitude that you should be playing hurt has led to what we find ourselves with at the moment. And what keeps me in employment is the amount of injuries that are being suffered, particularly in relation to the hamstring. And look, the hamstring injuries in GAA is nothing new. It's nothing that we're not all accustomed to, but that doesn't mean it can't be changed. And look, we have been successful in recent years in the club that I work for in reducing the amount of injuries and acute injuries over the course of season to season through knowing the players a little bit better, through implementing a structured strength and conditioning protocol, which is both in the gym and on the pitch. And it's really, really important that that team and at that club because we've smaller numbers than the teams we're competing against. So we've got to keep our best athletes on the field. The best ability is availability. So therefore, if we want them to play more matches, we have to practice a little bit of patience and we need to progress them through a return to performance protocol or a return to play protocol that is measured, that is guided, that is controlled, and that is quite extensive at times. We can't just jump from, okay, you're doing some heavy RDLs there this week, right, we'll get you back sprinting next week. Or we'll get, what happens generally is actually we'll get you back into training next week. And it doesn't work. And I know it can be frustrating for coaches and it can be frustrating for athletes as well because they feel like, oh, well, I'm feeling good, like I need to go. But there is a huge difference in performing a single leg RDL with whatever, 60 kilos on the barbell to sprinting maximally for 30 to 40 meters. There's a massive difference in that. And it needs to be gradual and it needs to be built up. And if we know that sprinting is a skill and we know that all of these are movement skills, then we need to treat it as a skill. The same thing goes for if you have a quad strain and you're getting back to the pitch and you're doing a bit of kicking, you wouldn't immediately go out to the 45 and start kicking 45s off the floor. No, you might do a little bit of kicking out your hands 10 meters apart initially. Then the next week, you might increase the amount of reps by 5 to 10 and you might go 15, 20 meters apart, punting or kicking off both legs. Then you might go out another 5 to 10 meters. You might increase the volume by 5 to 10 kicks, and gradually and progressively you will improve and increase your loading so that you get back to a tolerance level where you can reintegrate back into training seamlessly and you can tolerate the amount of kicking and the amount of training that is going to be there. So we need to do the exact same thing in relation to our sprinting. We need to do the exact same thing in relation to our high-speed running. We need to do the exact same thing in relation to our change of direction as well. And look, there are tons of fantastic physios out there, and there are tons of fantastic therapists out there that do really, really good job of the acute to post-acute early stage of the rehab to performance spectrum up to the middle stage. And that's what I see for the most part, is that stage of the process is really well covered. But the reason that people come to me and the reason that I am a strength and conditioning coach that specializes in this stuff is because the latter half, the middle to late stage of the return to play rehab process is very much just, okay, you can do some jogging tonight. Okay, you can do these amount of runs at 80% max velocity tonight. Okay, you can go back training because I'm happy with how strong you feel here on this table test or on this Aspling test or on this isokinetic test, that I think you'll be able to tolerate the max outputs. But we know, like, those movements are not the same thing as maximal contraction at maximal stretch during sprinting. And if it was a case that strength solved all of these problems, strength and conditioning coaching as a job would be very, very, very easy, and it would be way better paid as well, because we just get the athlete strong and then we'd have no injuries whatsoever. Sorry, I'm gonna have to drop my pen. Mic drop moment. So we know that strength isn't going to cause or solve all issues, because it hasn't, essentially. A lot of the time, it's not the capacity that is the issue in regards to these people that are getting progressive and repetitive hamstring strains, calf strains, but often it is the strategy with which they are sprinting. So their technique is off. As a result of their technique being off, they are putting tissues under undue pressure, undue stress that they might not necessarily be able to tolerate. And as a result, they're consistently suffering these injuries. So they're going back, they're doing their slow strength training, their slow rehab, their slow movement mechanics stuff, and then they're coming back to the pitch and they're expecting that everything's just going to be solved, when realistically that's not going to happen at all. Because if change of direction, if speed, if sprinting, if stopping, decelerating are all skills, the same way that strength is, then we need to work on them and hone them as skills in order to be able to improve as an athlete and reduce the risk of injury. So therefore, when an athlete comes to me with an acute injury, typically they will ask me for a timeline. I know myself that I have an idea as to how quickly I can get this person back to match play if they're playing championship next week. I'm going to do my best to have them able to do so. However, if we are not under time pressure, I am not going to rush things, and I know how much time for this specific injury I would like to have in order to be completely confident that the risk of injury is not going to be high when they go back. And that's probably a little bit longer than what they have been given, and probably a little bit more conservative than what they've been given by the other practitioner they are working with. And I'm not going to contradict that practitioner, because they do believe that they're doing the best thing for the athlete. And I'm not going to tell them how to do the acute or the post-acute phase or up to the middle stage of the rehab program, because that's their specialty. But the only way it works is if we collaborate and work together to get the athlete back. And I'm not going to discount what they're being given, even if not necessarily all of it I will agree with. But there's no point in arguing, because the athlete trusts them. And if the athlete trusts them, then they're likely to see the benefits of it. My bias as a strength and conditioning coach is I'm probably going to try to get them to load it, and load it a little bit more in terms of the load, so the amount of mass that they're moving, in terms of velocity, so the speed of the movement. So we're working across the force velocity curve, and then we're going to progress it over time. And then when we get back to the middle stage of the program, I'm going to try to get the plyos in as early there as I can. And I'm trying to get some exposure, because of my speed bias, into some running mechanics type drills and into some loading on the pitch as soon as I can as well. After that, we're going to progress the plyos from extensive to more intensive over time. That will vary based on where the injury is. So if you have, say, a hamstring issue, then potentially we're not going to progress you to some horizontal plyo variations yet. We might not want high eccentric stress either. So we might just get you doing some box jumps initially, progress that to some counter movement jumps, progress that to some horizontal bounds, and then some repetitive bounds, both single leg, unilateral, and in terms of the bilateral, or did I say unilateral and bilateral there as well. We will do some extensive unilateral variations for sure, but we won't want to do the intensive ones just yet, because we don't have full confidence in you being able to tolerate them. As well as that, we progress you along that spectrum. At the same time, due to the vertical integration approach that I use, I'm going to progress you with a short to long approach in terms of your speed exposure. So oftentimes I will get athletes back sprinting earlier than other people would get them back sprinting, because from work by, I think it's Hacken Anderson that I've seen speak on it, he starts sprinting 5 meters quite early, and he might do 10 reps of 5-meter sprints. And realistically, you're probably not going to get up to a velocity in that 5 meters where you are going to be at risk of pulling that hamstring. As well as that, you're getting exposure to the stimulus that is causing you the fear of re-injury. And what am I going to do from there? I'm going to progress the distance. I'm going to use a short to long approach. So from 5 meters one day, the next day we might go to 10 meters. Or we might just do more volume of those sprints. After that, we'll go to 15, we'll go to 20, until you can tolerate like a 30-meter or 30-meter fly or a 40-meter fly. I'm not going to have full confidence that you're able to tolerate the max demands or the worst case scenario that will happen in a match where you're taxed to run at high speed or your max speed in transition and under fatigue as well. But we need to push your ceiling up and maybe even improve your max speed so that you can tolerate lower intensities a little bit easier. Besides all of that, I'm going to do some mechanics type stuff. So potentially, depending on the issue, like if it's an ankle issue, I'm not going to do some switches and whatnot, but there's no problem with me getting you to do an A march or some A walking drills, as well as potentially some projection drills on the wall or on the barbell, focused on improving and retaining your ability to project your body forward, be that in a horizontal forward plane or in a lateral plane for a change of direction as well. And as well as that, with all of these exercises, I'm also going to have to put in some change of direction work, because that's going to happen on a match day as well. And a lot of hamstring injuries, not as many as happen at or getting to or coming down from max speed or at max speed, but a lot of them happen on change of directions, maximal change of directions, maximal deceleration. So we need to have full confidence that you're able to tolerate that as well. So we might put in some shuffle drills, lateral shuffle. We might put in some crossover steps. We might do that over 5 meters initially. Then we might be doing those movements into a transition into a sprint as we progress on. We might do some cutting drills, like a side step, like a split step, like a goose step, depending on what your sport is. And we might do that over a 5-meter acceleration into a 5-meter decel. And then we might progress the acceleration. We might do a fly into a hard decel. But we have to have full confidence across that spectrum that you're able to decelerate maximally, as well as accelerate and sprint maximally. And I would say from listening to this, you are seeing why there is so much value in this, because I have had a number of athletes this year in an online setting come to me, typically with hamstring issues, some with ankle issues or ankle injuries, but I've got them all back to play, full confidence, feeling fine, feeling 100%. And that's only happened through patience and having a structured approach to our return to performance program. What I didn't touch on there is we will also have some mechanics drills in there too, to hopefully improve your ability in terms of your strategy for movement. Because as I've said earlier, it's typically with these repetitive cases, not exactly a strength issue, and strength isn't going to solve it. So it could be a timing issue, it could be a firing issue, but it could be a positional issue as well. So if we improve your technique and improve the strategy with which you're accelerating, you're decelerating, you're changing direction, then we're going to unload those tissues slightly, and we're going to reduce your risk of injury and hopefully improve your performance. So we're going to do some ankling drills. We might do some bleeding drills. We might do some front side mechanics drills. We might even run some wickets. And over time, we're going to hopefully see some tangible changes in your strategy and in how you're running. And then hopefully that will transfer over to the field. But if we can't necessarily identify it, and you're not going to run the same way you run in a frontside bleed or a wicket on the field, it will hopefully move your bandwidth from which your worst case versus your best case, it will shift it further to the right, so further up. So your worst case scenario for how you will run on a match day will now be better than what your worst case scenario was previously when you were under fatigue, if that makes sense. as well as that your best case scenario will improve. And as a result of that, your maximal output, your max speed will improve as well. And then obviously with what I touched on there in terms of ankle issues, a lot of the time what I see is, okay, we're going to strengthen the ankle. That's fantastic. That's done. Okay, do some plyos this week and then you can go back training next week. But you're neglecting a huge part of the process in terms of when are you going to be at risk of suffering an ankle injury when you're changing direction or decelerating. So why the hell are we not training decelerations and change of directions in our rehab program? And why are we not progressing them across a spectrum of closed drills right up to semi-open drills, through that into more open drills, and then further on to chaos and into training and match play? Why are we just going closed change of direction drill, a T drill or whatever, curvilinear run potentially, like very rarely as well, in fact, not very often some max decels, some change of direction in a closed scenario, and then we're going from that, okay, you're good, back into training. Now you're getting 20, 30 decelerations and change of directions in a training session versus 10 that you did that were non-reactive previously. Now they're all reactive and you have to react and you have to put your foot in a certain place. You better have full confidence that you've improved your strategy and you're able to tolerate that load through both ankles. You're not biasing one side, because we know when there is some sort of a deficiency between right to left, then the risk of injury is going to go up as well. Another thing with the return to play process, a lot of the time we're just assessing it ourselves. We're not actually testing and monitoring it. And I know some physios and therapists don't like the use of metrics and the use of tools, and potentially they can't afford them, and that's perfectly fine. But there are a number of apps that can be used to assess jump height, to assess your rate of force development, your ground contact times. Like Output is available, but you can equally use My Jump and My Sprint. And then after that, you can use your coaching eye to see what is happening. And you should be looking at what is happening as well. So it's not just what they're doing, it's how they're doing it. So we need to understand movement and understand what is really high quality movement, and we need to understand potentially the KPIs to get there, and we need to understand what we shouldn't be looking for in terms of potentially, if you're doing a change direction, like excess of trunk sway and spilling over and really sinky hips and a sinky movement and bias towards one side. We should know what the KPIs for effective change of direction are, and we should be trying to coach them into our athletes. The same thing goes for when we are sprinting. We should be identifying whether we are getting the similar stride length off each side, whether reactive off both ankles, whether we're stiff off the ground, where the contact, the heel contact is in relation to the hip, where the pelvis is, what our thigh block is on each side, if there's a discrepancy between right to left. And it's really basic enough stuff once you know what you're looking for, and it's easy to identify. And I feel like sometimes it's just neglected. But like, if we're asking our athletes to get better and to improve, then surely we ourselves should be always striving to improve as well. And we should be looking to learn more and get better, and get better at hopefully showing them and giving them confidence in what they're doing, and making them and helping them to understand why we are doing these things. Because that's one thing that is still challenging for me, and I've definitely got better at it over time, is like, it used to be, we're doing this. Okay, why are we doing this? And I would either give them an extremely long, complex answer as to why we were doing it. Kind of contradiction to this podcast episode, but I would give them that, or I would give them the answer because I said we're doing it, or because I said so, because I couldn't be arsed to go through it. But we should be able to make them understand, or help them to understand, and they should be able to understand what we're looking for, because it's really basic stuff. So that's our communication skills. And in order to gain their trust, we need to improve our communication skills and how we convey this stuff. But a prerequisite to doing that is actually understanding what we're looking for. So we've got to go away and we've got to learn this stuff. And we've got to get the reps in terms of improving our coaching eye, so that we can then improve our cueing and improve how we're communicating and conveying that to the athlete, to elicit and help them to move in the way we believe they should be moving, or in the way that we will achieve the KPIs necessary for efficient and effective movement, which if we get there, then hopefully we will be able to avoid or at least significantly reduce risk of injury. Because obviously we can't cross it out altogether, because there are contact injuries, there are just issues that could arise as a result of many other things that go on in people's daily lives, psychological stress, poor sleep, in terms of poor nutrition, sickness, illness, any number of things. It could be our fault as well. It could be loads being too high. It could be us not covering all our bases in relation to our strength and conditioning program, or it could be us being too married to our S&C program and not taking on feedback from others as well in relation to it, and listening to our athletes in relation to the program. And very important point as well, and something that I bang on about a lot, is one program is not a one size fits all. We need to be okay with getting our athletes on an individualized program and a progression that is appropriate to them, not just giving them the stock program and not being able to move away from it slightly from time to time as well. There are small wins as well. Like just last night, one of the ladies has an ankle issue and she's progressing really, really well. And she asked me during a drill, she's only just reintegrated to on-pitch running mechanics drills and some frontside drills and improving her mechanics and more intensive plyos. And she asked me afterwards whether she could jump into one of the drills for 5 minutes. And I weighed it up, and from a practitioner's perspective, I should have said, no, there's a bit more intensity in that, a bit more chaos in it. But from a personal perspective, knowing the athlete that she is, I thought, okay, 5 minutes, it's going to be a huge win for her because she's been out for so long. It's going to see and make her feel like she's progressing and moving. And it's probably going to increase the buy-in to the rehab or return to play protocol or program, so that she is more adherent to it over the next couple of weeks, so that we can start to transition her into training earlier down the line with more confidence, and she will have more confidence as a result. So as a result of that, I did contradict the literature to a sense, and I made the decision, say, yeah, no problem, 5 minutes, no problem, go ahead. But important as well to note that a lot of the time with this stuff, athletes are instructed that, right, you are doing this return to play protocol in terms of running, and it's that 80% really high volume running that doesn't necessarily improve performance or prepare them for the maximal outputs where they're up near their 95% plus max velocity, or it doesn't prepare them for necessary number of high-speed running meters in a game situation or in a training session or across a week, because they're running fatigued. And as well as that, it makes them run with a posture or run in positions that are potentially very far away from my technical model and far away from the worst word in the world, which I'm going to use now, optimal. They're a little bit more suboptimal because they're fatigued, so they're not able to tolerate it. So the quality is reduced, but the quantity is up. But that's often given to athletes in relation to this stuff. And then they're said, if you get through all this, then you can go back to training and playing matches. Sometimes you will have a coach that says, right, you're only going to play half of the match or 20 minutes tonight, and then we'll progress your minutes over time, which is a very rational perspective to take. And it's a great idea. But why do we not do that with training sessions as well? Why do we not still say, right, we're going to progress you to this amount of training this week in team sessions, then we're going to progress you to this amount the following week, this amount the following week, this amount the following week, and then hopefully after that you're back into your full training week with the squad, and we'll be happy to have you back, and we'll have full confidence that you are prepared to play and you're a better athlete than when you got injured. And a lot of the time it's too high as well. Like they're given, okay, this week you're doing 80% of the training session, then next week you're doing 100%. Where did like 50%, where did you jump straight to 80% from? Like, what the hell? Like, surely we should be starting with warm-up and progressing maybe to no more than 50% of the training session with your additional return to performance program and return to play protocol in terms of your sprints, your accels, your decels, putting them into the drills that are a little bit more non-reactive and a little bit more closed, so that we've less chaos in the drill and less risk of injury. And then after that week, the literature would say we probably should go by no more than 10 to 15% per week. So by right, we should go 50%, 65%, 80%, 95%, and then potentially we will overreach the athletes and go to 110%, in that they will be completing 100% of the team session as well as their additional return to play, return to performance program, so that we overreach them slightly so that we can back off the following week before they play. And then hopefully they'll be able to realize all of the work that they have done by reducing the fatigue and then realizing the speed gains, the strength gains, etc. But we might not even have to do that. We might just have to get them back to 90, 95, 100% of the team training sessions. And then once they have that done, then we have full confidence that they can go into a match play scenario the following week. And then what we can do is, if they're going to play a match the following week, we can reduce the training volume slightly. So we can bring them back down to maybe 80%, 75% of the training volume in the week, and then play them for 30 minutes on the weekend, play half the match or whatever. And then the following week, we might progress them up to 100% of training match play and maybe 75% of the match, so 45 minutes. And then following that, we'll go from 100% of training play to 100% of the match, or 60 minutes. And as you can see, that's a quite extensive process. But if we're going to have full confidence that we're going to get them back and the risk of injury is going to be reduced, and they're going to progress them in a manner that we do with our preseason training and our off-season training, in relation to our running programming, in relation to our speed programming, in relation to our amount of change of directions, in relation to our training full stop, and our plyos, everything, it's the principles of progressive overload, then potentially we should be doing it that way, because the ultimate goal is obviously towards the end of the season. So we need to keep the main thing the main thing. Now, that being said, sometimes shit happens and you have an injury and you're playing championship next week or in 10 days or 14 days or whatever. And in the event of that happening, absolutely, I will use an aggressive approach with the athletes. I'm more than capable of doing that, because I know you can't go through that whole process. It's not practical, because we need them to play. And there's no point in getting them back for November, December, because we're already knocked out and there's no point this season. Sometimes there may be, but for the most part, if we're still focused on this season and the athlete is okay and confident and wants to play, then we maybe need to go with a little bit more aggressive approach. And I've had success doing that as well. But I've also had instances where I didn't have success and athletes did get injured and they run the risk, and we know the risks and they accept the risks, and the coaches accept the risks, and I accept the risk. And it just happens. And look, we rolled the dice and we rolled a 1 or a 2. But we rolled the dice at least, and we did our best. So there is a place for doing that. But I think if we're given the opportunity to not do that and to have full confidence towards the more important, or the perceived more important stages of the season, we might as well use that time, practice a bit of patience, and get the athlete back to a level where we have almost full confidence that they are a better athlete than when they left, and that they will have less risk of injury. So remember, it's return to performance, not just return to play. But towards the championship end of the season, maybe it is just return to play. So I think that's enough rambling around this topic. You can see that it lights me up quite a lot, and it is something that's been coming up quite a lot for me and a lot of athletes all around the place. I only have a couple of spaces open for online or in-person or hybrid coaching for June. I'm keeping the group as closed as I can because I want to deliver a really high quality service. And as you can probably tell there, it is a little bit complex in terms of how we program and how we respond to how athletes react to their personalized and individualized programming. And sometimes shit happens, like an athlete who was just sick all last week. So he missed a week of the program. So unfortunately, we're going to have to reduce it back down and go back to that stage of the program and complete that before we progress on to the next stage. And I've had instances in the past where athletes have got frustrated with me because they said, well, you said I could progress to this stage this week. And I was like, well, yeah, but you missed all last week because you were sick. So we can't just skip it. It's like leaving cert history. Like, you can't just skip chapter 19 and hope they don't ask you it on the test. Like, it doesn't work like that. You have to go through all of the chapters. You have to go through the process. So I live, I learn, I deliver the best quality that I can possibly deliver. And if you want to be one of those two spaces and take one of those two spaces in the Petey-Performance Premium Pack, make sure you message me sooner rather than later. But I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Solo episodes are always great for me. I get to process my thoughts. I get to talk about things that really get me going and really I'm passionate about. So I hope that passion kind of comes through, and I hope it is easy listening for you guys. And I hope there's some home truths there for people to listen to and from people to hear. And it's just my perspective on things. So if you feel like I'm stepping on any toes, pull me up. I appreciate both the positive and the negative feedback. But I hope you enjoy it. And if you did enjoy it, please remember to like it, share it, and send it. And best of luck to everybody for the rest of their league campaign. But if you need me, you know where I am.